Hello, everyone. I'm Jared Bowen, Executive Arts Editor and the host of Open Studio at GBH. We are delighted to welcome you for the special lunchtime chat we are calling Transforming a Legacy Brand for the Digital Age. Normally, of course, we would be at our Brighton studio, but we are delighted to partner with you virtually and welcome our other partners from Boston Design Week, which has been an ongoing collaboration that we have valued very much. In a few minutes, I will introduce our speakers, but before that, I just want to take a step back to orient you to a Zoom webinar, which is a little bit different from a regular Zoom meeting. Unlike a Zoom meeting, you can see and hear us, but we cannot see and hear you because you're all automatically muted. So during the course of this virtual event, the best way to communicate with us is by posing your questions in the Q&A tab that you'll see right there at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to as many questions of yours as we possibly can. Just please be sure to indicate your name, the town you're tuning in from, and the question that you'd like to pose. And again, we'll get to all of the questions that we can during this hour. If you see a question that you want to hear the answer to, you can also vote for it by hitting the thumbs up tab next to the question, and the questions with the most votes will rise to the top of the queue. So now that you have the basics, let's get started. I should also mention, we are well aware that so many of you sent in brilliant questions as you were registering for those events. We have incorporated those into the program as well, so know that we'll also get to as many of those questions as possible. So we thank you for doing that too, for doing your homework ahead of time. So those are the basics. Let's get started. To set the stage for our event, I want to show you a few short videos. Let's take a look.
The W in WGBH was rooted in the broadcast age, the don't touch that dial age. These days, we're in the what's next era, the beyond broadcast era, the era where you need us to be everywhere at any time. So we're leaving the W behind. We are GBH. We are creative. We are curious. We are changing. We're GBH. Nice to meet you.
So we are moving forward at GBH and with our program now, and I'm delighted to welcome two of the individuals who really chiefly led this brand refresh. First, Tina Cassidy is GBH's Chief Marketing Officer. She leads GBH's marketing communications and public relations efforts, which include local and national marketing, institutional branding, events strategy, creative and design services, public media stations relations, and audience and media research. Before joining GBH in 2019, Tina was the Executive Vice President and Chief Content Officer at Inkhouse, an innovative digital marketing and public relations agency. And prior to that, she was a journalist at a little paper we all know called the Boston Globe. Tina is also the author of several nonfiction books that focus on women and culture. Her latest is Mr. President, How Long Must We Wait? Alice Paul, Woodrow Wilson, and the Fight for the Right to Vote. She's on the board of the Conversation US and was previously on the board of the GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from Northeastern University. Also joining us is Mark Minelli. He is president and CEO of Minelli Inc. Mark has devoted the last 30 years of his career to building a leading brand strategy and design firm. The firm has created brand and communications program for Fortune 100 companies and a broad range of leading nonprofits in the arts, education, and healthcare. Minelli's work has been recognized in design and branding publications and has received awards in the United States, Europe, and Asia. A frequent speaker, a little Boston accent sneaking out of there all of a sudden. I don't know where that came from. A frequent speaker on branding and culture, Mark has presented to audiences including World Brand Congress, the American Association of Museums, and the American Marketing Association. He served on the board of the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston and is currently board director of PACT, an international development agency operating in more than 30 countries. Please join me in welcoming Tina and Mark to our virtual stage. So great to have you. I think we'll try to have a little bit more decorum than the last public forum we saw last night. Can we agree on all of that?
Yes, please.
All right.
We certainly do that.
Chris Wallace is estimable. I know that I am no Chris Wallace. All right, well, let me start with you, Tina. As the CMO, a relatively new CMO at WGBH, when you first came, why did you decide to rebrand?
Thanks for doing this with us, Jared. First, I'll just say that, rebranding the organization was not the primary thought I had when I joined. I grew up in this region watching Channel 2. It's really all I watched as a kid. And when I joined WGBH in March of 2019, I viewed my role very much as a brand steward, in the same way that you parent a child. You protect it, you help it grow, you help it evolve and work through challenges and opportunities. And the one thing that I noticed right away about our brand is that we are now so much more than Channel 2. We produce most of the content for PBS. We have a local NPR station. We produce podcasts and, of course, educational curricula for 1 million teachers nationwide. We had invested so much effort into those sub-brands, including our national programming like Masterpiece and Arthur and so forth, that WGBH's own message had been diluted over time. And we're also doing a strategic planning process around digital transformation and studying audience behavior. And we realized that half of our audience impressions already today are digital. And then on top of all of that, there were practical considerations, including brand architecture, which we'll talk about later. How do we name new products and services? And how do we pop on digital? And how do we improve accessibility, which is part of our mission? We invented closed captioning, so we needed to make sure that our brand and our fonts and everything else were legible. So we looked for a partner who would help us, our already talented but very busy internal team, take it to the next level.
Well, let's bring Mark into the conversation now. Mark, I don't need to tell you that how prestigious this brand is. It's known nationally, of course. I'm always struck when I interview a lot of celebrities and well-known people around the country. A few that come to mind: Tom Hanks, Sarah Jessica Parker. The moment I said I'm Jared Bowen from WGBH, they'd light up because they just have this great association. So many people, I think, of course, going back to childhood. So on the one hand, I'm sure this was incredibly exciting to have this opportunity, but very daunting. So how did you receive this task?
Well, we were incredibly excited. I didn't grow up in New England, but as a kid, I grew up with the programming and have been a lifelong fan, as are many people in my office. So it was really exciting. And to your point, it was a little bit daunting, honestly. I mean, we were tasked with recasting one of America's great icons, one that was woven into the fabric of our culture. So I think we were humbled by that, and we tried to respect that heritage at all times.
So Tina, you're mindful of this too, especially as the new person coming in. Where does this process, and where did the process begin for you?
It began with research, which is something that I'm looking at every day, but really digging in on trends in audio, video, digital consumption, public media versus commercial media, demographic data, looking at our own geography, our content offerings. We interviewed members, employees, leadership. So we really took in a lot of information, and we shared that with Mark, and he and his team did some additional research as well. And that really led us down this path that we're talking about today.
Well, Mark, walk us through that. I can just have these visions of reams of interviews and research and impressions. So you have all of this material. How does the process evolve? What is the process for then coming up with a plan and a design, a new design?
Your impression is accurate. Reams of material, in addition to all the great research and background material that we were provided, we will almost always employ research protocols to understand 3 critical areas. How does the organization see itself? How do other people see it? And what's going on in the world that's changing that we really need to grapple with and understand? And I think that gives us the triangulation needed to properly ground the strategy and position it. The trick is, of course, how do you whittle that down so it's something simple and emotionally resonant enough that has the legs to flow in a lot of different areas. With GBH, there had always been at its core this powerful pioneering spirit, and we wanted to capture that as a new kind of rallying cry to really elevate the creative potential and importance of public media. So I think there's something at the core of the organization that resonated internally, externally, and was really needed in the marketplace.
So Tina, I mean, Mark is still very much right here with us, so it's a little bit awkward to ask, but what did you think when you first saw what he and his team came up with?
Loved it. It was quite a moment. I remember sitting around the conference table back when we did those sorts of things, and hearing this idea for the first time. You know, we all just sort of took it in and thought, wow, you know, it makes perfect sense. But we were also, well, I will speak for myself, scared to death, right? I mean, you know, really making a change like this after 70 years is a big deal. But before we moved into the design phase, we shared the idea with leadership and others, and thankfully they loved it too. So it gave us confidence to move forward.
So Mark, how did you approach the design aspects of this? I mean, this is a sizable shift for us. And as Tina mentioned, 70 years, but you've changed it. We see a color change here, other changes. Talk us through how you landed on it.
Sure. We did a lot of different things. Some worked and some didn't. One of the things that we did, which I think the slide will come up momentarily, is we plotted all of the media companies across the landscape in terms of how they positioned themselves with logo and color to see if there was an opportunity there. And what became the signature color, that really beautiful deep purple, worked really well in application. And it also gave us some headspace to sort of have something that's memorable and not crowded in. I think the heart of it was really the deep exploration into the primary mark. How do we best maintain the spirit and intent of the original icon, but have it still point boldly forward? I think our hunch, and it was validated as we were working with Tina and her team, was that paradoxical drop shadow, it needed to stay. It was the connective tissue between the great legacy of WGBH and the forward look of GBH. Lastly, I know we talked about it, but not explicitly, of dropping the W in addition to eliminating 3 syllables when you say it. It allowed us to make a mark that was much less horizontal. And in this world of application, that means much more bang for the buck, much more legibility. So it allowed us to make a more concise mark. In the 1970s, when it was developed, you didn't have to worry about putting something in the social media bug that didn't exist. We also did a lot of work on reworking the letter forms so that they felt much more modern and much more accessible.
Let me just say with you for a moment about color. I mean, having to choose paint colors for my home sends me to bed for like 3 weeks because it's such a complicated task. How complicated is it to choose a color, but then choose the hue? That has to be an extraordinary amount of effort, I would imagine.
Tina, I think we went back and forth for 2 months on what the exact tone of this would be, obviously so we can all see it in broadcast, but we couldn't sit in a room together and look at tons of paper and print either. So those had to be mailed to everybody's houses. So it's important, it's complicated, and it was not made easier by the fact that we were in the middle of the crisis.
So Tina,
that purple as a color from a psychology perspective, you know, represents empathy and equality, which are brand attributes that are core to who we are. So it did work that way as well.
I asked you earlier about what your first impressions to the overall concept were, but how about to the logo itself?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we really, in addition to spending a long time refining the color, our team collaborated with Mark's team to really refine the form of the drop shadow and the letters in particular. You know, one cool thing about the G is that it both sort of elicits this idea of a play button and also an aperture, which we felt like both represented who we are, and also the roundness of the G in contrast with the W previously. It's much more approachable, friendly, huggable, and that was an attribute that we also wanted to make clear through our brand, that we welcome everybody, and we wanted to be, you know, friendly in both in terms of how we show up in the community, but also how we look and feel. So that was a really interesting process to get there.
Another part of the logo, I think a lot of people have curiosity, what's the font and how did you arrive at that?
Yeah, well, the font is Red Hat, and we, because we're a nonprofit, we obviously were very careful with how economical we were being with this. So we chose a Google font, which is free and also highly accessible to others, which we thought was important too. It's much more contemporary than our previous text. And what we love about it also is that it just feels, you know, again, really fresh and open. It's highly legible in a small font size, which is another important aspect of accessibility, especially in the move to digital and when so many people are reading or looking at content on their phones.
So you left room in the budget for more GBH tote bags is what you're telling me.
We're hoping to have an online merchandise store sometime soon, so stay tuned for that.
So Mark, tell me about some of the other design elements, backdrop, wallpaper, what came into play here? Sure.
I think in order for the brand to really work best, especially for a large complex organization like GBH, you need a good kit of parts. And the first one I would mention, which was kind of a nice ancillary benefit in a bit of an accident, we were looking very, very closely at the interaction of the letter forms and the shadows, because when you're changing a mark that's this iconic, it's really the devil is in the details. And when we were doing that, we found these wonderful croppings that were very gestural and could be pulled out and allow a lot of fluidity in communications and be used very differently. I think we have a short video that shows those croppings. More broadly, we're looking at a set of tools that were to frame messaging. What's the storyline? How does that hold together? We needed to expand a color system to accommodate the really amazing content pillars that GBH has, and of course that needed to work in harmony with the purple. You can see that palette here. As Tina mentioned, the typography, what's our signature typeface, and what's the hierarchy around how we use type. We also spent quite a bit of time looking at imagery and how do we maximize the compositional and emotive impact of the images that we use. And lastly, format. What are the compositional elements in layout that will hold this together from application to application, which includes position, the croppings, how we use the primary mark and color.
I think if we start to think about what we see on the consumer landscape, we recognize that this seems to be happening more and more out there. The companies are having these brand refreshes that change but don't change their logos. Tell us where we fit into that and what you considered as you launched into this.
Well, I think, yes, companies and organizations update their brand because the world changes. So we can't just sit there and pretend that it doesn't. I think one of the tricks with a brand in terms of trends is it's not what you put in, but it's what you leave out, because great brands have a crystalline clarity, but also great white space. Audiences fill in the blanks based on their perceptions, interests, and passions. It's the extraordinary programming that really gives the brand meaning. We just wanted to create a modern, memorable vessel for that. But as you see on the slide, there are lots of very well-known companies and organizations that are moving their brand. I think the general trend is to be more reductive, less language, shorter and crisper to clarify that brand purpose. It's not just in brands, by the way. It's part of becoming more global and connected. For anyone who's ever put together an IKEA thing, it's languageless instructions. They only have to do it once for the world, not 110 different versions.
I mean, if we look at some of those logos, PBS, Starbucks, even MasterCard, is it dicey to play with images that people have such a deep connection to?
You have to take it into consideration, but I think I would liken it to, remember when we changed the US currency? When I first got it, it looked ridiculous. And now when I get the old one, it looks utterly ridiculous. So I think we get used to what we get used to. And it is an ongoing discipline to manage the brand.
So Tina, again, thinking of those other brands, GBH is a little bit different because we appear in so many different sectors of society. So how did you factor that into the refresh?
Yeah, it definitely added to our to-do list. We have this spreadsheet that started with about 400 different line items of things that needed to be updated. So for TV, for example, we have these things called bugs, which are, promos that slide on and off the screen telling you what's coming up next and so forth. We have production credits as well at the end, and we'll share that with you in a moment. We also have, how we audibly represent the brand in language on the radio or on other audio platforms like podcasts and so forth. And so it's quite deep. It's also, how we sort of show up as a brand, how we live the brand. So it's not just about the color and the shape of the mark, but about the kinds of content that we're creating and making sure that it is accessible and available on many platforms for everybody.
So one of, I think one of the most beloved parts of the WGBH brand and logo is the sting. I think we have a video of that. Maybe we should play that, and I'll ask you about it on the other side.
So I get the after school vibes every time I see that, right?
So do I. And being at home
Yes.
right now, I feel like I am cheating, when
Right.
you're home in the middle of the day. But I have been at GBH for a very long time, something I don't like to confess very often. But this has made me realize I actually do not know the story behind this thing. So what is the story?
Yeah, so we call what you just saw our Glow-Go. And, obviously there's graphics and then there's the sound. That glowing electronic fanfare accompanied the GBH logo during our program's closing credits. It was meant to signal our enduring promise of quality programming. The sound was created in 1974 by the legendary composer Gershon Kingsley, who at the time was an up-and-coming musician. He is someone who elevated the Moog synthesizer to almost cult status in the 70s, and the 80s also have him to thank for the music that I grew up on anyway. That old logo that you just saw was created in-house by a former VP of design, Chris Pullman. And then we decided to keep that sting, that iconic sound for the same reasons that Mark outlined about the drop shadow, but we had to marry it to our new look and feel.
And perhaps Andrew Lloyd Webber stole a little bit of his music from our own WGBH sting. So let's show a video that this has been updated now as part of the brand refresh. Let's show people that, and you can tell us about the changes here. Yeah, it's very mysterious.
It's mysterious. I think it sucks you in. Also, just having, the Pavlovian response to the sound is so important, but it feels much more, cinematic and updated. And that's really what we were going for. I just wanted to give a shout out to my colleague, Elias Millette, who designed that with lots of input from the rest of our team. Very
talented. He worked on Open Studio too. I love his work.
Yeah.
Mark, talk about the concept of beyond broadcast. I think we have a sense now, we're in 2020, especially during the pandemic, we're all at home. We realize that life has very much changed in terms of how we consume. So how did that come into play with you?
Well, I think if we can step back for a moment, there's so much, it changes so quickly, but if you think about how much has changed in the way we access the content that we like, we just no longer live in a world that's bound by just channels and dials. We consume media how, when, and where we choose. That's only going to accelerate in the future. Maybe we won't be consuming it all within our houses in the future. But I think that the intent of that succinct line beyond broadcast was really to set the flag firmly into the future. A future where innovative public media thrives and grows and reach and impact in this rapidly changing media landscape. And I think that's important for GBH. It's important for public media, and it's important, in my opinion, for the health of the country.
Tina, what's the process for rolling out a brand? I know that since we've done it, I think I've only messed up once on air in saying WGBH. I think I've heard that you're hiring callers. Do we all get a little zap when we say the wrong thing? Is that part of your plan?
No, not true. Not true at all. Don't be spreading rumors like that. No, we obviously know that our on-air talent will be making mistakes. Those habits are hard to break, and that's okay. Our legal name is still the WGBH Educational Foundation, so it's not inaccurate, and people will still hear that at the top of the hour on TV and radio because just by virtue of the FCC. But you know, we are vernacularly now known as GBH, and it will take time for people to absorb it. So what's the process for rolling that out? We set ourselves a deadline of September 1st. We've been working on this for well over a year. And the reason why we chose September 1st was a couple of reasons. First, we designed our member magazine and wanted to include the new branding in that. And that was going to hit our memberships mailboxes mid to late August. September 1st is when the press release went out. And then we know that it's going to take us time to work through that very long spreadsheet of to-dos, but we prioritize them. So we started really thinking about, the highly visible aspects of our brand, our website, email signatures, the mural over the turnpike. And then, of course, as of October 1st, you'll start to see the new branding show up in our graphics packages on air and also in the sound on radio and other new content that we're producing for audio.
Tina, just a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned all of the different places that we see the logo appear. I think you call it brand architecture. What's the challenge in having something that's so comprehensive?
Well, I mean, you can think about brand architecture in a couple of ways. You've got a sort of a branded house like Apple, and then you have a house of brands like General Mills. We're somewhere in the middle. But what we knew was that we had sort of brand sprawl. We create new things every day, and we had sort of dissolved our system for how we name them and how we design a look and feel, or whether they even need a design look and feel. What you're seeing on the slide here is my colleague's wall from, in the land before time, when we were all still in the office. And this was just us starting to plot all the different brands and what they look like. And you can see that, the farther you get towards the floor of that wall, the less recognizable it is as one of our products. And that was something that we needed to solve for. So we created this new system where the GBH is the thing that is emphasized at the start of our products and services. And that also just helps simplify the process for going forward. So you can see here what that looks like. And it did involve renaming a few key elements of our brand, including, for example, WCRB will be CRB. WGBX channel 44 is now GBH 44. So you get the idea, really making sure that there's a consistent and logical approach to our architecture.
What's been the biggest challenge for you in all of this?
Well, it's been, there have been many, including, we weren't expecting a pandemic, of course, but the teams have been amazing collaborating together. Change management is central to rolling out a new brand. I think one of the things that we did very early on was to create a brand task force internally and involve a representative from every department, product or service within the organization to be at the table with us to help us figure out what they needed, how to roll it out, who was going to change what. And it's really becomes very mechanical and task oriented. I would say the other aspect is just making sure that in that process we don't lose in the weeds the bigger message, both to our employees but also to our audience, right? That this is signaling a really important change that we're going through right now, but also into the future. And so it's just storytelling on an ongoing basis to bring everybody along.
And finally, before we shift over to our audience Q&A, Mark, I just want to ask, you were mentioning earlier what the landscape is and how it's changing. We see a lot of people doing this. I'm sure a lot of curious people are watching right now as they contemplate how they might do this with their own organizations. What's the counsel you give to somebody who's just beginning to think about a rebranding process?
I could probably natter on quite a while about this, but just a couple of points. I think a brand should always point forward. You don't want it to be behind you. Certainly it should be a reflection of who you are, but also where you go next. I think one of the things that's tricky at times like this, when there is so much disruption in the fabric of our lives, that there's a tendency for organizations to just hunker down and try to get through it. And that's actually kind of a bad thing, because this is a really important moment to look boldly forward. I think there is enormous collective hunger for organizations that we care about to show that they are looking towards the future with hope and optimism. We need that right now. The second thing I would say is, and Tina mentioned just the incredible hard work to do this, that branding is not about the logo. It's this notion of brand as culture and culture as brand. It done well, I think, captures the essence and aspirations of an organization. And that organization has to be ready for the change, have the capacity and drive to implement those ideas. Audiences don't see that strategy. They only see how well we execute. And I have to put my hats off to Tina and her entire team. They were terrific partners. They really personified that pioneering spirit. They did an incredible job of rolling it out internally and now externally. I know they feel like they still have a lot more to do, but boy, they got a lot done in short order. So kudos to them.
Kudos to me, because I figured out how to change my email signature. that was epic for me. So I'll take
It's epic for me
you have the
too.
GBH background up too.
I know, that was also key. All right, we're going to shift into our Q&A with the audience now, but before we do that, we have another very short video just to show people the transition from the WGBH brand into GBH. So a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't changed, as we see there for the brand and the organization that we know and love. All right, let me go to our first questions. I'll just open up. Either of you can jump in. Again, we'll continue to keep the great decorum that we may not have seen last night. Our first question comes from a few guests in the Q&A who have asked, they go right for it. They're good journalists. How much did the rebrand cost?
I'm happy to answer that. It's an important question. It was quite economical, as Mark will probably tell you. But we didn't have any additional budget to put into this rebrand at all. We use our existing marketing budget and simply reprioritized what we were doing. I mean, knowing that this brand we hadn't invested in this brand in over a decade, and we had serious logistical challenges that we needed to address to operate in a digital environment, that it was time. And that, compared, in addition to the strategic imperative that was happening, we had to really shift. So, this work also was begun well before the pandemic hit. And I think that we felt like it was our job to finish it. And brought a lot of the work in-house after Mark's team really presented us with this brilliant idea. And so now we're executing it, as I said, just within our current team, in addition to our current duties.
Did I hear the number there? Did I miss that? Sorry.
No, you didn't. It was not a lot of money. It was, okay. and I'm sure that Mark could share that in the grand scheme of branding, that this was quite economical.
Yeah, and I would say, I won't give you the number either, Jared, but I will say that I think we've worked a lot with nonprofits, and you're always rubbing two nickels together to get a dollar. But this is, I think, organizations like GBH, they need strong brands, and we are competing against movie studios and other major channels that are spending enormous amounts of money to enforce their brand. So we have to do that work. We just have to do it on a shoestring.
Right, our next question comes from Emily Teller of Westford, who asks, what other changes accompany dropping the W, both visible and invisible / behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm happy to answer that too. It really it involves permeating the idea behind the rebrand into everything that we do. If we're drafting a press release about a new product or service, it means that our boilerplate has been updated, but we're taking a different approach with the headline and how we're presenting that information, really thinking about, the multi-platform aspect of a product or service. It's about how we show up in the community. We have totally pivoted as an organization in the pandemic to do virtual programming. You might be interested in one in particular called the State of Race that we've got going every month, where we're convening a really important community conversation. And so all of that is beyond broadcast, of course. And so I think that's just a very tangible example of how we are living the brand every day.
Okay, our next question comes from Andrew Darcy of Marlborough. He asks, did you have to work with national PBS and NPR on this change? And if so, what was their reception? Do you foresee other markets making this change?
Yes. PBS had gone through its own brand refresh about a year ago, and I actually worked very closely with them in terms of how that would affect our own organization. And it also sort of helped me see some of the architecture challenges that we have. PBS updated their brand because they knew that younger people, those under 50, started to not know what the P head, or that, that little iconic P with a face in it, what that meant, who was the brand, what was the brand behind that. So they made the letters PBS much larger and came up with a color that is really just a digital first color, that bright blue. So because they had just gone through it, they really understood what our needs were and what we were going through with this change. And they were super supportive and excited about it because it certainly aligns with PBS's whole plan for the future as well. NPR, it also went over very well as well. They have a new chief marketing officer there too, nationally. You've seen in other markets, dual licensees, those are public media organizations that have both TV and radio stations, take really creative approaches with their rebrands, some more successful than others. So I think that everyone in the system is really thinking about how they show up in this era when people might not own a television or a car anymore, but they still want to consume public media content. So it's been a great conversation starter.
Marcus, let me just ask you about that too, about how often you encounter that you might have to work around the parameters of working within a larger family, as it were.
I think that's often the case,
Yeah.
and especially because the world gets much more intertwined in terms of partnerships, that we have to look at how it's going to be operating in the real world. And certainly we want to advance PBS, but we also want people to know that you're watching something that was completely conceived here at GBH, and we might also be next to the YouTube channel or on Netflix. And it's not just the public media environment that we're operating in. We are basically competing in a world of all media. So I think it's important that we stand up and stand out in that landscape.
Our next question comes to, it's from Allison to Mark. You know what, I'm just gonna put the glasses. I'm gonna go with the Anderson Cooper glasses. This has been a pandemic casualty, my eyes. Now I can see. This is a question for Allison to Mark. Typically, how long does the rebranding process take?
Boy, it really depends. It could take as little as 6 months for a smaller organization, or we did a lot of work for Massachusetts General Hospital, and that took about 3.5 years. So I think it is related to the complexity of the market and the complexity of the organization. Mass General has 27,000 people working there in community hospitals. So it takes a lot of time to understand what that mechanism looks like and what triggers will help it move forward.
Next question comes from Cynthia McCarthy of Westwood. Change is not easy for everyone. How did you address the change within the community and internally? I think that's for you, Tina.
Well, internally, it was really about communicating early and often and listening to questions and concerns as they bubbled up within the organization. Externally, it was really about making sure people understood the story behind the brand refresh, as opposed to just having people react to a change that seemed, somewhat out of the blue. And I think it's just, you're not a one and done. When this brand rolled out on September 1st, it wasn't, we knew that we would be telling this story over the course of a year or more. And just reminding people over and over again, why this is happening. And it's not just about why the logo has changed, but like what's going on with our content? How are we showing up for the community? How are we inviting the community in? To participate in our events or to stream any of our content. And so that's a forever thing, but so far the reaction's been really great.
Yeah, Mark, you must have to deal with this too, to think your job isn't just about design and process, but it's also a little bit of psychology, it's a little bit of PR. You must have honed that, I would imagine, over your 30 years.
That's why I don't have much hair left. Because we do it the wrong way. I mean, you have to create a breadcrumb trail around why we're changing things design-wise. But the real power of it is in the ideas and the culture and the hard work that the 800 people who come to work or stay at home and do the work define the character and value system of the organization. And we wanted to help point people towards we are going to be beyond broadcast in everything we do. So I think, I've learned a lot about that, the tension between brand is culture and culture is brand, because it has to work for the audiences, but it also has to feel right for the people who support the organization, who belong to the organization, who work for the organization.
All right, next question comes from Ron Newman from Somerville. Well, this I think is a good follow-up to what I just asked you. Isn't this an expensive and frivolous use of public donations that could better be used to produce more programming? See, so our audience knows nothing is filtered here.
We produce so much programming, and I think the challenge, for me and as the Chief Marketing Officer is to help us decide as an organization with our limited resources what story we're trying to tell to bring our audience along. We could promote probably 50 different awesome kinds of content every day, new things that are emerging and available for our listeners or viewers to engage in. And if, that effort is really just about, you can tune in on channel 2 at a particular time and place, or, stream now on 89.7, is that actually getting the job done? When what we're trying to do also is invite new audience to our brand and let them know we're here for everybody. So it's almost like we hit a reset button. And, I can certainly appreciate, the question about whether this is necessary or not. But I also just want to say, in addition to that big story that we're telling about who we are and appealing to others to come into our universe, it was about the real practical logistical issues that we had with our old logo and the old way we show up. I mean, this is a very minor thing, but it's something that hasn't been mentioned yet. If you live in Iowa and you're watching PBS and the production credit says WGBH at the end, let's say you just finished watching Masterpiece or Nova or American Experience, that's going to seem odd to you. Why, if you are, tuning into that local station, are you being fed content from what appears to be another local station, right? It's confusing. And also, if you're a potential, newcomer to public media, WGBH might have signaled, well, I have to live in a particular area, and that's not a brand that I'm familiar with because I live in Chicago. But if they know that GBH is a national brand that stands for something, maybe now we have a new podcast devotee in Chicago who knows where to find all of our podcasts. So this hopefully is a way of this is really a way to bring more people to the table. And in that regard, from an investment perspective, it's really important for us to do.
And if I could, I would echo that and say that this is about the future, and it is about the next generation of people who are critical to the advancement of public media. I have 3 grown kids, and they've never known a device with a channel on it. So we have to think differently about how we are visible in this environment, because we need that next generation of people to know why public media matters.
Next question comes from Dave McMahon, who asks, the digital landscape seems like an important driver of this change. Many historic organizations are in the same reinvention space. What would you consider the biggest challenge in rethinking a historic brand that is attempting to modernize to fully digital?
All of it. I think we landed on a really good solution, because while the rationale is strong and makes sense, if you're scrolling on your phone or your iPad or even on your television on Comcast, you're still going to recognize our brand. So part of this is also not alienating our existing base, the people who have tuned in to us for decades. We want them to be excited as well and know that we are positioning this organization for the future in what is really just an increasingly competitive media environment. We have to compete with Netflix now, and we do. And that's not something that, we would have said 10 years ago. And that's one of the really big shifts that is happening. Mark, you mentioned that your grown kids, don't have a TV or radio. I mean, that's true across America. And so how do we, again, position ourselves for this next generation and make sure that they know that, they might have grown up on Arthur and then they stopped watching public media after that. How do we invite them back? How do we know we have awesome drama just like Netflix does? How do we let them know that we have, an amazing science series, the #1 science series in America called Nova, that you can also stream on YouTube? Same for Frontline, right? And so if those people don't own a television, we want them to be consuming us on these other platforms. That's our role in public media.
As you're answering, it's just occurring to me too, Shirley Leung from the Boston Globe just introduced me to this, really fantastic term, fabulous because it gets right to the heart of the matter, but location agnostic, where we see so many people are going to be moving during the pandemic. And I imagine this is your way to ensure that they take GBH with them.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Yes. I mean, because if you are, Googling for, a brand that seems local, that in and of itself poses some challenges. We want people to know that you can take your PBS video app with you anywhere, that you can stream any of our national series anywhere, anytime. Yeah, it's incredibly important. And yet, I also just want to say broadcast is not going away. Channel 2, Channel 44, 89.7, CAI, these are all important aspects of our organization delivering content to our audiences. And, we remain completely committed and invested in those channels too.
That's good to hear, because did I mention that Open Studio is on Friday nights at 8:30 on GBH?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. And you can
thank you.
You can also watch it online too, right?
The next question comes from Siobhan Murphy of Watertown. What advice do you have for how an organization with terrific expertise and history but limited brand recognition can use digital tools to leapfrog to greater brand recognition?
I guess I could.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'll take a stab at that first. I think we've worked with a lot of organizations around New England that have a long history. I mean, it's part of what we have here that's different than the rest of the country. And our argument has always been, yes, you could look at the past as the past, or you could look at history as a series of present moments. And there were really innovative and important things going on at those moments. And how do you recontextualize them so they reach forward? I think part of what for both good and ill, the digital revolution gives us is it in an exchange and dialogue. It's not a one-way street. So we want to open up the channels for engagement in a number of ways, and having something that sticks but is open-ended and allows for engagement is really critical for every organization right now.
Mark, I think this next question is meant for you as well. It comes from Chris Campbell in Nashua, New Hampshire. Can you articulate how you see the personality of the brand and what the change was from before in personality?
Well, I think Tina mentioned a lot of those attributes. It is human, accessible, open for all, here for everyone. And I think that's always been true. We just wanted to recapture it. I think the other thing I would add, and I'd love to hear Tina's thoughts, is going back to that sort of notion of history of GBH has always been innovative. Closed captioning was incredible innovation, and they're not going to stop innovating. So there's no, we only did this in the past and we only do that in the future. It's a continuum of creativity, of very high caliber of stewardship of important content.
Luke and Elise ask, where did Mark's team leave off and the GBH team take over on the rebrand, on the brand refresh?
So I think there was a lot of back and forth between my team and their team. I do want to call out specifically Joseph Allegra, who led the design team on my side. You know, going back and forth and learning from one another. We don't have all the right answers. You're just trying to figure it out. And once Eileen and Piper and Tina and the rest of the folks started to take it apart, it's like, we don't have enough colors. We need this to work. So there's a lot of back and forth. And then we were prototyping some ideas about where some of those applications could go. And then the internal team was really running with that, and we got a chance to see some of those things as they were evolving. And also we were modifying the standards, the brand guidelines during that period. Pretty much over the summer was that 3-month period where we were finding that.
Yeah, Tina, do you want to speak to what the work is that you have now? You've talked a lot about, of course, the education that you have to do within the organization, externally, of course, but where else do you and your team pick up?
Yeah, maybe just to drill down a little bit more on what Mark was saying, they brought to us this idea about dropping the W and then the basic mark. Our team worked to refine the font and the shape and the drop shadow for the applications that we knew we would have. Also thinking from a color perspective, although we knew we wanted to land in the color range, our team had to really do a deep dive and think about broadcast and other digital applications that we are in every day to make sure it was going to be the right shade. So really it just became much more granular when our team picked it up and ran with it. And now, the process that we're in is literally, recording on-air promos. So that's getting voice talent and so forth, creating the video assets for broadcast promos as well, designing the new production credit, for example, is another thing that really, it's only the type of thing that we could do in-house because we know we have very specific specifications. There will be a website refresh coming in the future, and we will be changing our URL as part of that. We didn't want to just go ahead and change the URL now without really, digging a little bit deeper. Our digital team is working on that. So there's plenty of work to be done. I will also just say, this process included having to change our social media handles, which is super time consuming and challenging. And I want to give a shout out to Tori Starr on the GBH side for managing that process as well, because it doesn't just mean that we're updating our look and feel. We actually had to change our name to a 3-letter name construct, which typically Facebook and Twitter don't allow. So it was a lot of work. I mean, things that, you wouldn't normally have to put on your to-do list, but it's been fun.
The next question comes from Kim from Ashland, who asks, have you tested with different age demographics? Does the shorter brand mark, in other words, no W, make more sense now to the younger, fully digital generations? Do folks who grew up with the W, like me, this is the questioner and me too, personally, the sting means Zoom. Notice in the lack of it, any sense of loss?
We did test it with different cohorts who are members. So these are people of all ages who, hopefully already know and love us quite well because they support us. And we incorporated their feedback into all of this. As I said earlier, as soon as someone understands the story behind it, they get it, and for the most part are really excited about it and appreciate the fact that we are being good brand stewards for the future. I don't think that there was a big difference in terms of age about how people reacted to the change. I think that, it would be totally different. And if you went out to people who didn't know GBH at all and you shared the old mark and the new, that might be a different story. I think that the questioner's hunch would be right, that younger people would, think, okay, this is a national media organization. But I think everyone has that gut reaction to a traditional call letter name that looks like a local broadcaster. And so if you didn't know us, that's what you would think. And that's what a lot of people who do know us in our local geography still think.
From Allison in West Newton, was there a moment when you felt that click, individually or collectively? I'm so glad you asked this, Allison. I was thinking this, I wanted to ask this earlier. When you knew you had the new logo and then the rest was just the spit and polish.
Yeah, Mark, you want to take this one?
Sure. I think for us, one of the aha moments is we didn't know what that W and K stood for, that it was a geographic sort of anchor. And I think untethering that allowed the new mark to sort of fly free. And I do think that was one juncture. And then there was a countless number of variations, which Tina well knows, about the letter forms inside. How thick is the job title? All of the stuff that you don't want anybody else to see, but you have to, it's sort of the sausage, what goes into the sausage making to get to the final mark.
And Tina, did you have your moment where you thought this is it?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Mark that the major moment was the dropping of the W and the rationale behind that. And I think, you know, once we felt like we could do it legally, knowing that we still have to say WGBH at the top of the hour on broadcast, then it just made perfect sense and everything flowed from there.
Well, that is all the time we have. Has anybody, by the way, checked eBay to see how much the WGBH t-shirts are selling for?
Collector's items.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a pleasure to understand this process. I love talking about process. So it's been great to understand this with both of you, Tina, Cassidy, Mark Minelli. Thank you so much for spending this time with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Jared. It's been fun.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks again also to Boston Design Week for partnership on this event. You'll see in our chat tab, we have links to the GBH Sting ringtone and Zoom backgrounds that you can use on your digital devices. We'll include these links as well in our follow-up email communications tomorrow. Also, before you depart this afternoon, we'd appreciate your feedback. You'll see a survey pop up on your screen, and we would be very grateful for your input. As always, you can stay informed about all of GBH's events by visiting our events page, wgbh.org/events. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.